back to the Hi-Fi Viewer. It's been a couple of weeks since I posted anything. We had vacation and life and stuff getting in the way, so I haven't had time to post anything, but I'm back. I thought my next video would be going to somebody else's place, which we will do, and check out their system. Actually, we'll do a lot of that, but my son George tonight, who is far more of a YouTube wizard than I am, suggested I do a top 5 list. And I didn't know top 5 what, and I really hate top 5s. I hate the question, what's your favorite anything? Like, what's your favorite movie? What's your favorite band? Like, I can't answer those questions. But anyway, he recommended we do my top 5 records, which again, I was unable to whittle it down to a top 5, so we're gonna do top 7. So my number 7 band that I'm gonna start with, I can't even whittle it down to just a record. Like, it's gotta be just, in some cases, the whole band, and in this case, this band only released not even a record's worth of material anyway, is Swing Kids. It would have been, I think, about 1995. I grew up listening to hardcore and punk rock, and by about 95, I was in college. I would have been a sophomore in college then, sophomore, junior, and I wasn't really listening to a whole lot of like straight up hardcore punk rock anymore, more like indie rock, other underground stuff. But a band was coming to town called Still Life, and a bunch of kids were like, you gotta go see Still Life. And I saw Swing Kids, this band called Swing Kids from San Diego, and so I went, and I was more enamored by their name, I guess, because I was kind of into like swing music at the time. And they just blew me away. They just knocked my socks off, and to this day I listen to this stuff and it's just timeless. They sort of reformed. Their guitar player died a number of years ago, and they reformed with a different member who was Jimmy LaValle, who was a different member initially. They put out this 7-inch. To my ears, this pales in comparison to this stuff, but I've got a number of copies. I've got the original 7-inch was released on Kidney Room Records, which I'd never heard of them doing anything else. This was the original pressing of it, and then also one on 31G, which is Justin Pearson's label, the vocalist for Swing Kids, and then of course their split 10-inch that they did with Spano Corzo. I remember it was the day this came out. Omaha, which I live in Lincoln, Omaha record store about an hour away. The day this came out, drove to Omaha to buy it. I couldn't wait to get it. I don't know, I just think their brand of hardcore and their aesthetics and everything about them. Seeing them live all 15 minutes that they played blew me away, but yeah, so that's my number 7. So my number 6 record, it's nothing too esoteric or underground or surprising or rare. I grew up, like I said, first sort of like music form I really fell in love with, well, I guess it was rock and roll, but after that, like the thing that really like I perked up and took notice to was hip hop and rap. And in the early 80s, I was into breakdancing, and so early hip hop went hand in hand with that. When this record came out, I just like, man, like it was like nothing I had ever heard before. I remember they played in Lincoln that would have been like 84, 85, I guess. After that show, they were banned by the city to never come back due to their show. I unfortunately did not get to go. After that show, my parents forbid me and my sister from listening to them. Now, like, my kids know the song Paul Revere from start to finish, which I don't know if that makes me a good or bad parent. I obviously didn't listen to my parents forbidding me to listen to it, but yeah, this is like, to this day, like, I think this is a timeless record, and I think it's great. I was getting into Swing Kids. I mean, this would have been like, I guess more like 1996, 97-ish. Yeah, more like 97. All of my like-minded music friends that was when we were first discovered like experimental music and underground, experimental improv. And some of this stuff I remember almost like being offended that my friends claimed that they like it, because I was just like, nobody like John Zorn and stuff like that. I just like, I thought they were being pretentious. Like, you're being pretentious pricks saying that you like this and trying to make yourself look and sound smarter than you really are. Of course, like, so I went from hating it to loving it like that overnight. And the record that really did it for me, and it's not so much the record but the musician, but the initial record I got was this, which is Derek Bailey and Min Tanaka. I have since just fallen in love with Derek Bailey. Of the, I don't know, 20 or 30 Derek Bailey records that I own, and if you know anything about Derek Bailey, he has a very deep discography of records. There's no shortage of Derek Bailey recordings. I mean, they're not always easy to find if you want the actual physical copies, but there were a lot of them made. Of the ones that I own, this one is probably listened to the least, but it will always hold a place in my heart just because it was the first Derek Bailey record that I got, and Derek Bailey to me is incredible. Derek Bailey records that I do listen to more, I like this one a lot. They did with Dave Holland's good. I have a whole slew of CDs of his too. A thing that a friend said to me once about Derek Bailey is, he said, listening to Derek Bailey is like listening to the rain hit the window. And I thought about that and I've never forgot it, and I think that that's true. There's just something random but soothing and calculated at the same time about how Derek Bailey played, and very specific, something very specific about how Derek Bailey played his guitar. I always wanted to see him play. I live in Lincoln, Nebraska. That short of me traveling to either San Francisco or New York or London, that was never going to happen. I mean, unfortunately, he died a number of years ago, so I'm never going to see him. But yeah, I think Derek Bailey was a genius, and yeah, that's why he's on my list. So you're probably noticing a theme to like time frame on a lot of these records in terms of the time in my life at which I got into them, and I don't think that there's anything. I think that that's normal. I think the majority of people that like really latch on to music that makes a huge and lasting impact in their life happens in their teenage, early 20s, teenage years to early 20s, and it was no different for me. I will say that these records that I'm talking about, like, they're just the ones that I always just like go to. It's like my go-to records that like really made an impact. I've got a fairly large record collection, and I keep consuming new music on a daily basis. So to say that this like somehow sums up my musical taste would be absolutely absurd. But I got to start somewhere, so I'm starting with the stuff that like really mattered to me during those formative years, and that was the point. Is like those formative years is like when you. It takes a lot more to impress me these days than back then. You learn in a much smaller capacity the older you get. But when you're younger, you're looking for things to blow your mind and to be the things that you're going to take with you for the rest of your life, whether you realize it or not, which was the case with me. I didn't realize it at the time, but I now realize that this stuff was really important to me at that time, and I've carried it with me my whole life. So, the next record, or next band, I guess, is Mineral. The word emo, as it relates to music, has been drugged through the mud, especially once MTV got its greedy hands on it and bastardized the term and applied it to a bunch of things that, in my opinion, I mean, it's, every music fan's going to make those claims about, like, what is and is not punk rock, what is or is not, well, jazz, everything's jazz, but, like, emo, like, what is not emo, blah, 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 blah. To me, in my opinion, it's stuff like this, and Sunny Day Real Estate, and Christie Front Drive, The Promise Ring. Like, that was the stuff that, to me, those were emo bands. And this band in particular, they're from Austin, Texas. They put out a couple of 7-inches on Bernie McGinn's Caulfield label, which was based out of Lincoln, so they played here a lot. I saw Mineral play, I don't know, 10 times maybe. Blew me away every single time I saw them. I remember the first time I saw them play, they played here in Lincoln, them, Christie Front Drive, and I believe it was Sideshow, which was Bernie's band, and I had never heard of or seen Mineral or Christie Front Drive, and I saw both those bands in the same show. And I remember me and a friend of mine just left with just like starstruck. But anyway, these records, like this and their 7 inches, I neglected to pull out their 7 inches, like this, and then The Power of Fail, and Serenading, both these records, like, I listen to this stuff to this day. And they reformed and did a reunion tour. I think they're still kind of doing it overseas, but anyway, I was lucky enough to get to see them play in Kansas City. That would have been probably 4 or 5 years ago, and it just like, you know, nostalgic, but just brought tears to my eyes. It was those guys they were just an amazing band. I mean, it comes and it goes. I get into different things, just inexplicably at different periods of time. But for the past, 20 years of my life, I've predominantly been consumed with jazz. I love jazz. I've turned into that guy. I love it. And the record that really did it for me, I bought my first jazz record, which was actually a cassette, when I was a senior in high school in 1993, and it was Joe Henderson's So Near, So Far. Bought it, didn't get it. I tried, I listened to it a lot, and I did not get it. Now I listen to that record, and I love it. But at the time, didn't get it. But I kept trying. I kept coming back. Initially, what drew me in were classic jazz record covers. The aesthetics of jazz, there was something about it, and I'm not the only one. There's lots of people who, Francis Wolff and Reed Miles and all those guys, there's been books written about those guys. I actually wrote my final paper in college on Francis Wolff. Anyway, the record that really got me really sucked into it, which again, this isn't going to be a big shocker to anybody, is John Coltrane's Blue Train. This one's not. This is actually my very first copy I ever bought. I probably bought this in 1995, and this is the dreaded direct metal, the DMM direct metal master version. I'm an audiophile, but fellow audiophiles will just cringe at that's just the worst thing possible. I actually have always thought that this copy sounds great. I would love to have an original mono copy from 1957. I'd love to win the lottery. There's lots of things I would love. But in the meantime, I've got this version that they put out in 2008. And the thing that I love about this is that, I don't know if you can see it on there, but instead of John Coltrane, it says Lee Morgan. Which is funny, because what I love most about this record, and John Coltrane in general, I've got different CD versions as well. For God's sake, I have him tattooed on my arm. It's the same, taken from the same picture. What I love most about this record is that it introduced me to Lee Morgan, who maybe blasphemy, but I love Lee Morgan, and I love him more than I love John Coltrane. And that's what I credit this record. Not only this record really getting me past the point of curiosity in jazz to the point of starting to understand it more and having it be something that spoke to me, as opposed to I felt like it was somebody else's music I was trying to understand. That this record did that for me. But furthermore, it introduced me to Lee Morgan, who, oddly enough, I don't have any Lee Morgan records on this top 7 list, which I probably should, but in a way I do, because I think that he was just as much of a critical player on this record as any of the other players. Okay, so number 2 in my countdown to my top 7 records or bands, which isn't really the case, but for the sake of this video it is, Pixies. I may say that the Pixies are, I'm not going to say they're the greatest band. Some people say greatest American band. They are one of the greatest bands of all time. I will say that, and I will stand by that statement, although I'm about to make a statement a little bit that's going to contradict that, perhaps. Actually, the first Pixies recording that I ever had was Surfer Rosa, which a friend so my number 2 band record and my number one were all influenced by the same one individual, who was a kid that I went to high school with I met him in junior high, went to high school with him for 1 year, and then he went to a different school, but I've known him ever since I was in junior high, and he worked at a record store. Both him and his brother were both big record collectors, record geeks. We had the same taste in music, and he turned me on to a lot of great bands. Like, he loved the Misfits. I learned about the Misfits through him. I learned about Pixies. So he played me, the day he got Surfer Rosa, he played me Where Is My Mind over the phone when I was in 8th grade. And not only Where Is My Mind, but it blew my mind. Like, I heard it and it was like I had to have that music. It was incredible. Shortly thereafter, October, I still have the flyer for the show. It was in October 1989, me and that kid that turned me on to the Pixies went and saw Pixies play here in Lincoln on their Doolittle tour. And I bought the cassette of Doolittle that afternoon. I remember we got out of school Friday, went downtown, bought the cassette. That night we went to the show. Like, so good. Anyway, Surfer Rosa was the one that really blew my mind. I don't have that on vinyl. I don't even know if I have that original cassette that he made me. I hope I do. Of course, Come On Pilgrim, amazing EP. So the thing I'm going to contradict is same but different. The Breeders, who Kim Deal, bass player from the Pixies, around about the same time that my mind's being blown by all of this stuff. Shortly thereafter, this happens, and this record, like, this equally blew my mind, and to this day blows my mind. Like, they're a great band, but this Pod is a great record. Kim and Kelly Deal are incredible. The thing I was gonna say that contradicts like what I was saying about the Pixies is I have a good friend who will argue that the Breeders were better than the Pixies or are better than the Pixies, and I just don't know. Like, some days I believe it and some days I don't. But regardless, I'm just happy that I know about both of them and own these records because, like, both incredible bands. Okay, so the coveted number one spot. I'm obviously a big music fan, and anyone who's into music, you get into conversations with people about music, and you get the inevitable question of who's your favorite band or what's your favorite record. And as I stated when we started this video, I hate that question because I can't in fair conscience say that there's one. However, there are times when you just need to give an answer because you don't want to get sucked into a conversation justifying why you think that that's a stupid question. So, I mean, there is some truth to the answer that I give to people. And the answer that I give to people every time is Fugazi, and predominantly this record. Now, I will say that they are probably my favorite band of all time, and I will say that their entire discography is amazing. Like, I don't think of them in terms of records. I think of them in terms, like, the way that people talk about the Beatles, which we should do a video on the Beatles. We should do a video on the Beatles and the Grateful Dead and why they are ridiculous. That why the worst thing about those two bands are their fans. That we should do a video on that. And why the people that are Beatles fans believe that all music begins and ends with the Beatles. And why those people, I want to kick them in the shin and break their nose. But that's a different video. So, Fugazi, I will say that I don't think about them in terms of single records. Like, to me, they were a band, they were a complete statement. And that sounds like a pretentious thing to say, but that's seriously how I think of them. However, this record, same kid that played me the Pixies, Where Is My Mind from Surfer Rosa over the phone, also played me Waiting Room over the phone. That would have been before the Pixies. Yeah, because that would have been 1989, early 1989. He played me that. The very next day, I went to a private school, grade school in downtown Lincoln, and my dad used to come periodically pick me up and take me to lunch. And he took me to lunch, and the school was really close, like it was downtown. So we go eat lunch, and then we go to this independent record store, Project Imports was its name, and I asked them if we could go to this record store, and they had the cassette, and I snatched it up quicker than there was no way I was leaving that store without this. I don't know, like I don't have the cassette anymore. I don't know where it went, which bums me out. It was black. I remember it was black with white text. I hope I still have it. This cassette was played to death. I had the privilege of getting to see Fugazi play, I think 6 times I saw them. Oh my Lord. The first time I saw them play in Omaha, that was in, what was that? That was the summer of 1990. It was the second time they played there. And it was, I mean, I could do a whole video on just that show because it was mind-boggling. It blew me away. It was in a place in Omaha called Sokol Auditorium, and it was I mean, I don't know if they had sold out because they didn't sell tickets ahead of time. You just paid $5 at the door, but it was packed, and I remember me and my friends were up. So it was like an old school like dance, like a place where they'd have like swing dances or polka dances. As a matter of fact, I know that they had them there. And so you had a stage and then a big, huge dance floor. And then, if this is the stage up here, there was a balcony that went around like this. And so the band's playing here and we're up in the balcony right here. So we could like see backstage right at least. And then, the floor and everything. And I remember at one point watching that show and just being mesmerized. And I remember looking around and I could not find a single person standing still. And that included the roadies, that included the other bands that opened. Like everybody there was so into it and on the same page and like moving. Everyone was moving to the music. And I was just like, yeah, like this is it. Like this is what I want. Like this is a band. And then just I don't agree with all their politics. They have some kind of extremist politics that I don't necessarily agree with. But their politics and how they handled themselves was so spot on. I mean, they were fiercely independent. I keep saying they were. They went on temporary hiatus a number of years ago, which kind of means broke up, but they never officially broke up. And everyone's, of course, crossing their fingers that they'll come back and play again as a band. And they've sort of touched on it. Joe and Ian are, I guess, in a band now together with Amy, Ian's wife. I haven't heard any of it. I can't comment on that. And anyway, so everyone's hoping that they reform, and I don't believe that will ever happen. But just how they handled themselves with never charging more than $5 at the door. I think towards the end they started charging $6. They never sold tickets through Ticketmaster. They only played all ages shows. They booked their own shows. Their ethics and the way they handled themselves, like they were believable. They did what they said. Like they practiced what they preached. And I had utmost respect for that band. And then of course just musically, good grief. Like people, like everybody has different tastes and I get that and I can respect that. But sometimes when people like things that I'm very passionate about and I love, if people like say like, oh, I just don't like that, sometimes I just question like can you hear? You have a brain? Like and I'm joking, but Fugazi is like that for me. Like I just everything they did was so instrumental, no pun intended, so impactful on me and just like how I thought music should be and how bands should be and the culture in which they existed and how they existed within it was just so spot on. And their style was just perfect. Yeah, that's my number one. Again, I could go on. I mean, I could have a whole separate video just about, I could have a whole series of videos on Fugazi. Not at all like all inclusive, but like for today, that's my top 7.